Welcome to another episode of the Spinoza Triad, where Dan Rowland, Dr. Richard Miller, and myself, John Gibbs, discuss philosophical ideas which interest us. This week, we are discussing existentialism and the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre.
Sartre's philosophy is based on the concept of existentialism, which is a belief that individuals are responsible for their actions and must accept the consequences of those actions. According to Sartre, individuals are completely free to choose their paths in life and have the responsibility to make their own choices. He argued that this freedom is a fundamental part of our existence and should be embraced rather than denied. Sartre argued that individuals have an inherent responsibility to choose their values and act according to them. He believed this responsibility is at the root of our freedom and ultimately makes us human. This conversation delves into the themes of existentialism. We explore the nature of freedom, the anguish of existence, and the importance of authenticity in a world filled with societal pressures. We discuss how Sartre's experiences during World War II shaped his views on human freedom and responsibility, and how these ideas remain relevant in contemporary society. The conversation also touches on the impact of the gaze of others on individual identity and the struggle to live authentically amidst external expectations. We begin with French café culture.
I think the first thing we need to do is light up a couple of Galois and get a small glass of something, kind of like a, I don't know, what do you drink in a French cafe? Don your beret.
Black polo neck.
A black polo neck, and be seated outside a Parisian cafe, 1855. Yeah, we're wreathed in the smoke of Galois. Oh, and very black coffee, very, very black coffee. And, here we all are outside the cafe. Even though we're sitting in sheds, really, we should be outside outside a Parisian cafes.
You assume it's some kind of university culture, but in actual fact, it's because the electricity was down after the bombings. There wasn't any hot water or heating, so they would meet there to chat because the conditions were so bad out, at home.
Well, it's very Socratic, isn't it? We were talking about Socrates that didn't write anything down. They have it's the salon idea that you gather together. Then you go away and write books about it and give lectures. But nonetheless, in essence, you explore a lot of your ideas with people who are, with you. You say drinking your coffee and smoking your Galois.
Interesting. When reading about him, he was supposed to have a fantastic sense of humor. Wasn't a really pretty funny guy, which you don't get that impression, do you? So, when you think of this sort of serious guy,
you wouldn't have thought existentialism from a populist point of view, from the use of that word, had any big laughs in it. I guess the criticisms you think of existentialism, that it is ultimately a deeply morbid and hopeless kind of thought of human existence. And I know it's quite human. There is humanity in here if you want to look for it.
You didn't start with Nietzsche and Kierkegaard in existentialism.
It comes out of those because Nietzsche and Kierkegaard are both reacting to the 19th century Hegelian dominance.
Well, I suppose he's a pivotal figure of the 20th century. So in our kind of fumbling way, I suppose we're trying to get some more understanding as he's such a big figure of the history of ideas in the 20th century. Born 1905, came from an upper economic class, so fairly rich parents. He lived in Paris And the key thing is his father died when he was only 1 year old. And at the age of 4, he had an infection which left him with one eye that wandered around, that made him feel quite conscious of his appearance. He thought it was quite unattractive because of this. But he started very early with his writing, started writing short stories as a young child, and excelled at school. He got to university in 1929, studied philosophy, got a first, where he met his future partner Simone de Beauvoir. And after university, he became a teacher and became a very unlively and unorthodox teacher. And he was allowed to continue writing during his teaching career, which is quite different from the modern experience of teachers today, in the fact his working week was only 10 hours. So he had enough time to fill with, going into the French cafe, Parisian cafes, talking and reading, writing. And this was suddenly interrupted by the war. He had to go and join the army. He first of all did military service in the 1930s, and then had to go and join the army in 1939, where he only served for about a year. And then he was taken prisoner of war by the Germans in 1940. And he had a kind of pretty difficult experience as a prisoner of war. Showing his kind of future influence, he organised his fellow prisoners and put on plays. And through his organising abilities, he managed to escape in 1941. And he did this by convincing the prison camp doctor that his imprisonment was a complete error, arguing that no one with an eye like his would have been drafted into the military, so that his eye was wandering, looking at his German guard. And then he became such a huge influence after the war. He quickly settled and became a national figure in French intellectual life. And he published his first novel in 1938, which is called Nausea. And that received hugely favourable reviews. And then in 1943, he then publishes the big tome that he's so famous for, Being and Nothingness, which is his major philosophical treatise that we'll just perhaps have a little look at today. And he continued writing plays and novels throughout his career. And also, it needs to be said, he became very active politically. In the 90s, he was actively involved against the invasion of Hungary, and he was also a big critic of the war in Vietnam. So yeah, he just continued to be a big influence on the French nation and French thought and Western thought. So I suppose what we're trying to do today is to look at his notion of freedom, what it means to be free, and what gave birth to existentialism. So I'll just say in a complete nutshell, very, very quickly, what his view of freedom is. He has a complete positive view of freedom in that he believes that we are entirely free to do anything without restriction, and that is the best expression of what it means to be a human being, to be entirely free.
I can see what you mean, but positive in the sense of it enabled freedom is highly, enabling. You're the agent, you're the hero of your own story, but it's also condemned to be free, isn't it? It's also a nightmare.
It's a problem. Freedom is a problem.
It's not good news.
I think that's going to be the meat of our discussion. Is what do we do with this freedom? We're all free, but we all want to be free, but we don't ask ourselves, how do we use our freedom well? It's often used politically and socially as a good, but it's never seen as a possible problem or or as a situation that we find ourselves in. Huge sort of anxiety.
The idea of freedom. He has this conflict, doesn't he, where he has, say you've got an individual, a subject or subjectivity, or just, a person. And he looks at that term, he has facticity, which is the sort of personality, character, the way you are for others. That's your facticity. And the other part of it seems to be this idea of freedom or transcendence. So that you can transcend or go beyond this facticity to absolute freedom. which in itself is a form of anxiety. He has some nice examples in there about waiters. Did either of you read that?
Yeah, he doesn't like what. For some reason, the waiters constantly have been kept waiting for his.
He's responding to deterministic arguments that says, very scientific, that says everything is determined by forces, by certain pressures acting upon it. If you look at any field of physics, you say everything in the world is deterministic. And science would possibly be saying that human beings are deterministic too. Now, what Sartre is arguing, obviously he's coming out of World War II, but he's arguing that human beings are not deterministic. And so he believes in a kind of radical libertarianism, which includes both forms of freedom, so negative freedom and positive freedom. So in other words, things you can actually do with your life. So you can actually become a millionaire, or you could become a better person. That's the positive aspect of freedom.
Just pick up a couple of things you said there, Dan. One is it's what he's coming out. He's massively influenced by his experience in World War II, being in prison, all this stuff. But then again, we all are. Not we all. We all are. Even us. Even sitting here now, the world is never going to be the same when you get the two great experiences of looking back at the Holocaust, looking back at the mass extermination by a rational, highly scientific, cultured people, the Germans, and at the same time, you're not going to be the same later on, but living in the world of the atomic bomb. Yeah, so in that sense, that's the context of humanity. Is if you have any belief in a kind of Hegelian process of history that moves endlessly forward towards greater, or if you believe in a Marxist sense in which the forces of thesis and antithesis are driving us forward to dialectical material progress, those things have been a bit blown up in the air, haven't they? And they've never quite recovered.
I wonder though. I wonder if, I mean, in a sense of his life, he was a Marxist at one point, wasn't he? I think earlier on he was a Marxist. I wonder if perhaps less of a kind of scientific response. I wonder if it's just he's a philosopher and he's looking at human freedom, autonomy, and it's more a rejection of the sort of structures, the social structures, or the viewpoint in which Marx looks at the world. You know, if you're looking in terms of, I don't know, your limits of the proletariat, or your position in the world as described to you through structure, existentialism is really a rejection of that, isn't it? Insofar as he's looking at in terms of positive freedoms here.
Yes,
that's a good point.
I mean, existentialism don't exactly fit together, do they? When he was younger.
Well, it's a highly original political theory, and while it's recognizably Marxist, he rejects structuralist Marxism. I think Sartre described himself as rescuing Marxism from lazy dogmatism. If you believed in the kind of freedom and agency he believes in, you're going to believe people should act better than they do. They should be more authentic, more honest, and so on. But he's certainly rejecting any kind of idea of the great engine of history.
Great meta-narrative.
Somehow the proletariat are literally the instruments of history. We have this terrible, terrible freedom.
So he says that the facts of experience, the way we experience stuff, suggests that we are free. That's his first argument: is that we have this enormous, we have this experience, and the experiences we have truly we choose freely. And you might say, "Well, you don't." Someone with someone who's going through a mental health condition or an addiction, it doesn't sound very sympathetic. You might say Sartre's not sounding very sympathetic, perhaps, if you take that view. What he says is that something like fear is something which crops up as a result of a situation, but you can then respond to your fear. And anguish is an essential aspect of freedom. So let's take, for example, being on the edge of a tall building might create a sense of the vertigo or the anguish that comes as a result of that is you perhaps planning what to do about that situation that is fearful.
It's the anguish of being free, isn't it? It's the anguish of living in the world without instructions. There are no guidelines. You're just thrust into the world of material existence, and it's like you walk along the edge of the cliff and you think, I might accidentally throw myself off. I might suddenly get that. Is the anguish. But then, he talks about anguish and abandonment and despair, doesn't he? These are
These are the descriptive features of
So
freedom.
yeah,
Nothing-
he's
Something
saying,
with freedom sounds good as far as I can tell.
yeah. So he's kind of,
It's not the freedom of it's the kind of libertarian self-help book. You know, this is the first day of the rest of your life. You can
not that
what
much
you
that.
will. It's not.
Yeah. No, it's real. And what he's arguing, his argument philosophically is there's no way you could experience that anguish as being unfree. There's no way you could experience that sense of planning as an unfree agent. So therefore, like you said, John, everything you do, he's saying, is because of what you think and what you are, what you are cogitating about at the time is something which you are doing entirely freely. So that's one aspect of his argument. We can only experience freedom as free people in response to emotions.
But let's imagine that. Let's imagine that we are confronted by that, and the idea of the inauthenticity of simply deluding yourself. I always had to be a teacher. What else could I do? And so on and so on. Or I had to make these. We're married, but I never really. I just couldn't bring myself not to be married to this person, and so on. It sort of happened as I went along. If somewhere in the back of your brain you're thinking, no, I always had the choice to do this. There's a notion of freedom. I'm pushing that aside. Then that's painful. Yeah. That's the pain and the despair and the anguish of somehow driving out of your mind the notion of this sense of freedom. So it is to be free is to be in pain, is to be in a state of, where do I choose? If you choose God, you've chosen God, haven't you? That was your choice. It may not make there isn't any necessary truth to it. You chose that truth, and you need to own it. And even as you do, and you go along to the church, and you sit there and you pray and such like, you sort of know that you chose this, that you're fooling yourself, and so you continue. This is of anguish.
That goes back to the psychoanalytic thing, as we talked about before, where there's a certain satisfaction in the familiarity of your pain. If you are a waiter who wants, you imagine you're a freedom fighter or whatever it is you want to be, but you live as a waiter. It's not necessarily just that you're in pain of being a waiter and you're fantasizing about being wherever it is you're going to be. So I don't know, whatever it is you really wanted to do with your life. But there's also, on the flip side of that, and that's sort of psychoanalytic point there would be that, there's a satisfaction in experiencing the weight and, the pain of being a waiter on a daily, an addiction to it. So there's a satisfaction in that as well, which I think, I don't know, maybe it affects. Well, I just think that it's and the argument would be, I don't know, I think Kierkegaard makes his point about drunkards, actually, that, if you drink, it's the person that drinks every day is familiar with the conditions by which they administer their pain to themselves. So it's kind of like all of their pain is controlled within the environment by which they choose to enjoy it in. Enjoyment, if you want to use that word, there's a pleasure in the pain. Well, perhaps in some respects, offer a way out of that, because in actual fact, pure freedom isn't necessarily it's a break from the deadlock of what you were experiencing before. What I think his point is that there's a fear there as well. I mean, there's an anxiety in accepting the abundance of absolute freedom. I mean, I always thought existentialism and Sartre in particular was always quite useful for teenagers. You get to that age where you finish the school, you finish the university, or early 20s, and you've really got a kind of, some people know what they want to do when they're younger, but that existential kind of anxiety of absolute freedom, you can literally do what you want, and it's not necessarily, I think when you get older, and obviously the years tick by, you would do anything to be back in that situation again. But there is also a kind of a fear of choice, of absolute choice. Well, you have to embrace it, I think, because otherwise you fall back into what he calls bad faith. You have to continually live in such a way that you stay, a fidelity to your freedom, if you like, regardless of how that feels.
This is why, in some ways, I think that he's not particularly a philosophy. It's an anti-philosophy. It rejects the big grand narratives. It rejects the Aristotelian kind of to live is to the purpose of being alive. The essence of being alive is to live honestly and authentically and honestly. Or Plato's the essence of being alive is to be governed by to seek the truth of the forms. None of that's true. Existence precedes essence. You're simply in this world, and the essence is what you make of it. I like think of the beginning of what you were saying, Rich. I was thinking of the beginning of Fight Club. First, so he's this young man. You see the first section of Fight Club before he gets into the Fight Club stuff. He finds a sort of delightful solace in going to various discussion groups where people meet, like Alcoholics Anonymous,
help groups, yeah.
People dying with lung cancer, and he sits there and he goes along there, and they all go, "Oh, this poor young man." He sits quietly there, and they hug him and they say, "Yeah, well, you're living your truth." And he's this complete pretending. And he meets other people who do the same thing. He's sort of enjoying the idea of their celebrating their pain in some ways. He's seeking out some sort of guide meaning through the enjoyment of being celebrated for pain. Yes,
I think it's a really good take of that. Fight Club's a great sort of summary of existentialism in some respects.
Yeah.
He's living under bad faith. Practicity would be his personality, the way he engages with others. He's got a job he hates. He talks about IKEA furniture and just sitting in a mundane way. And then this Fight Club is really the kind of his abundance of freedom, isn't it?
Yes, I love that bit where at the beginning, before he gets addicted to going to sort of cancer discussion group things, he's addicted to buying IKEA furniture. Yeah. It's surrounding himself with stuff to shield himself from being alive. Exactly. It's another existential parable. And I think that's what we're going to find. Is I talked about before we started Rango, the cartoon Rango. He's in his fish tank and he gets blown into the road and he has to live his life properly as this little gecko. Well, I bet you wouldn't find it too difficult to find existential parables in a lot of popular culture. Yeah, the attractive thing about existentialism is it is a description of it's a very, very uncomfortable description of our lives, about how we live.
The other part of it is the look or gaze. He talks really about, that's where expression how these other people, I think, come from, quite well known for. But he talks really about, he gives an example of being in the park and you think that you are free and you are yourself and you have this very sort of subjective, well, that's like the key point is as a subject, you see yourself. But then you see someone else in the park, see the other person, it's the sinkhole of being. And then the other person, looks at you. It's the other person, and the person looks at you, and you instantly then you realise that the world isn't just for you; that the other person is a subject as well, and they have a viewpoint, and now you have become object to them. So this kind of subject object, and this is where I think that perhaps the responsibility part comes in. So the subject looks at me, the other, as subject, and I become subject. And he says, my subjectivity disappears. And he has a nice kind of, what does he say? The pure shame is not the feeling of being this or that guilty object, but of being an object. So it's not even anything more than just being the object. So he has a nice sort of analogy here. He talks about looking through a keyhole on a landing, and you hear steps behind you. So you're looking for a keyhole, there are steps behind you, and without turning around, there is someone else looking at you. And this throws you back into yourself. You are a being looked at. And he has this kind of, he links this to sort of
Yeah.
the shame of becoming object. So this idea that the recognition, if you like, of yourself as object, as subject, but also the object of others. And this he puts into his sort of his three parts of being subject, this facticity, transcendence, and then being for others.
Tell this me, Rich. Tell that to any teenager these days, who suddenly looks in the mirror one day and realizes they don't look like the models they've been given this body, not the one they would have necessarily designed, and they've grown up to be not as tall or slender or beautiful or muscular as they'd hoped. That's the facticity of their life. They just got that lot, and now they look into the world. Well, the internet must be a hell, mustn't it?
Well, John, he goes on to say, actually, in relation to what you're saying there, he says, the gaze of the other destroys my possibility into probability and reduced to facticity. So you go from this idea of, all is possible to when the other is looking, I'm probable, and then it reduces you back to facticity, which is kind of this character of bad faith again. Yeah. So I think you're right. Modern contemporary culture, as lived on through online, is just the other, isn't it? That you're constantly seeing yourself through that, aren't you? The thing to avoid here is this, that freedom is necessarily the best. It's just not bad faith. It's not the best. It's the aim of existentialism, but it's also not without problems. I mean, the anxiety there as well. I think it's okay to be an astronaut or a dreamer as long as you're following the dream. I think the problem you would have is if you continue to be a waiter. I know you picked on waiters a lot, but then in your head was like, I'm going to be an astronaut one day, or I'm going to do this. That's the problem for you.
Or it would be fine to be a waiter if you chose to be a waiter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
She said, I'm a waiter because I wish to be a waiter. Not, I'm a waiter because it's really nice what happened to me, and I don't really like waiting, it's what I've got to do.
Which is really, Dan, what you mentioned at the beginning. We're coming back to this idea of authenticity. Authenticity, the life, it's challenged obviously by freedom, but it's one whereby you stay authentic to, I guess, what would be you without the bad faith? What it is, like you say, your goal was to become the best waiter you could be, then you become a waiter. If you want to be a musician or whatever else, yeah.
Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Mechanics or something. It's, Zen in the... Do you remember that book, Zen and the Art?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Zen is an interest in the process, isn't it, itself? Whereas I'm not sure Sartre, I still think, because he does talk about imagination as well, the importance of freedom as it relates to imagination. So there's a significance here. He talks about it quite a bit in being a nothingness, and really that freedom, there has to be an element of imagination there. And he sees this coming through the arts. This is why the arts are so important. I mean, he was a novelist. I think that he sees this relationship evolving out of that. But I think authenticity would be the goal, if you like, not freedom as such. The goal is to have an authentic life, of which you must deal with the problems of freedom.
That's Gramsci. That's the kind of, the through the art, through the revealing, through novels, through plays, you can be exposed to authenticity.
John, I was going to say, I thought it had, you can see here where the parallels with, I mean, you wouldn't put Nietzsche and Sartre together on many respects, but I think in this idea of authenticity, you can see what both of them mean, of you're overcoming your facticity.
The ever relived life,
the
ever recurring life is, to some extent, it's if you, it's a terrible thing to hold up to yourself, isn't it? Are you living the life that you would live forever and ever again, as Nietzsche suggests? That terrible idea.
If it's authentic and you're aiming towards becoming, if you like, I mean, this goes back to this is very reliant on Heidegger, this Dasein and this kind of being in the world.
Yeah.
As long as you're not, your authenticity is against bad faith.
I was thinking that we are remembering about the sociology idea of the mirror self, that we see ourselves in others, and the kind of horror of that relates to the idea of of hell is other people, the mirror self.
Yeah.
You define yourself in relation to what other people say about you. Another one is the
Lacan, wasn't it?
Lacan's idea of the big other. Who are you talking to when you're alone in your house? Who are you arranging this room for, which no one comes in but you? The sense of the beyond, that you're always being observed by some social construction of your own mind. I think those thoughts all come out of they come out of existentialism, but are related to existentialism, or otherwise known as living the way we do today. In a world where Nietzsche points out there is no God, God's dead. So what do you do? And that's the kind of way in which I think existentialism is simply describing that. I'm going to say I'm pretentious now. The modern condition. And the last thing before we get to the counters is a trend in existentialism, which is absurdism. Things are kind of daft. We mentioned that Jean-Paul Sartre has a sense of humor. Think there's a daftness, there's an absurdity about our lives. This strange, mortal, eating, shitting kind of world we live in. Make any sense? The world of the mind and the world of our consciousness are utterly combined. It's phenomenology. We simply exist in the phenomena of this world. There's nothing. We aren't constructing the world out of our minds. But we're simply in this world. We are what we are. Man simply is. I must admit, I would say I'm a complete physicalist when it comes to brain. We are constructions of our own brain. Whatever, in other words, there's no ghost in the machine. I think consciousness is a byproduct of being alive. It's a construction, and so on. But I don't think it necessarily means I'm not free. I don't think that leaves me with a complete deterministic view. Whether my brain is the brain I've got, and it makes me perceive these things this particular way because I exist in this world. So it's a brain in the world. I'd be very different if I lived in different times and different circumstances in different worlds. And yet it still leaves an avenue of personal agency. And I think that is where Sartre comes in. He's going to insist on some sort of area of personal agency.
He kind of rejects an idea of an unconscious. He doesn't engage with that at all. He would see something like a kind of Freudian id as being bad faith. That would just be an excuse if I'm relying on kind of underpinning drives. It was in Viktor Frankl's book, The Meaning of Life. The last part of that was on existential psychoanalysis. Frankl talks about logotherapy. So he was interested in how people dealt with the horrors that they'd experienced in Auschwitz and other camps, how somebody comes to terms with that. And at the time, the kind of therapeutic models of Freudian stuff would go back retrospectively, look at to try and talk your way through things that have happened. Where he says that the existential version of this therapy is to actually find meaning in where you are right now. So if you are suffering, to almost embrace, understand yourself as suffering at the moment and moving forward, which I thought was quite a kind of interesting take on it, because we often assume that the forms of therapy are dealing with an unconscious, and Sartre, initially you would expect existentialism to be against those kinds of things. So I thought it was quite an interesting angle therapeutically.
Maybe the way to like being awake is having a necessary illusion. The necessary lie is fine. I'm not an existentialist, so I don't mind buying into the necessary lie. Lots of us have to buy into the necessary lie. And the necessary lie is a side effect of living in the world of despair and of anguish. And things you have to lie. But it'd be good if you didn't. It'd be good if you could live the examined life.
Your social class will determine very much the decisions that you make, both in a very hard materialist economic sense, but also where you are drawn towards. The normal choices that you'll make, your gender will decide, your ethnicity will decide. All of these sociological structures will have an impact on the choices that you make when you were born in human history. All of these things already. I think that's what Sartre is dealing with here. That's why I went back at the beginning when I was interested in his relationship with Marxism, because Marxism obviously has a quite, on the one hand, quite deeply sort of structural framework here. So it's how within social structures themselves, where do you orientate yourself? And I think he's not saying more than you have a duty almost to try and be as authentic as you can. And your authenticity is really fidelity to yourself outside of bad faith. I see Sartre's existentialism as really a kind of, it's a way of living as much as it is a kind of hard list of philosophical do's and don'ts. You know, and in that sense, I think it's very valid today, nowadays. I think it's important to question why it is you're doing what you're doing, to challenge yourself against perhaps your natural predispositions, and try and live as authentic. I think the reason mental health is so bad now and depression goes so much is because people don't actually know what they really want. They get caught up in a tide. Well, because it's so difficult. You've got everything's economically difficult, culturally. You know, you're living your life, like you mentioned earlier, John, in a constant. This is why it's good when Sartre talks about the other. You know, you're constantly of the other's gaze continually. You are seeing yourself as subject all the time. So I think, in actual fact, Sartre is a very relevant thinker for the here and now, and especially for the younger people coming through now. I mean, we're all old, but you know, choices. You know, the choices that you have when you're younger to try and stay authentic and find out what it is. Don't have a list of things you want to be. Have a list of things that you don't want to be. You know, and then go back from there. And don't you think though? I mean, you know, it does seem like a kind of I think it's a good pill to swallow against much of the way that things seem so fast paced nowadays, and so there's no break, is there? You know, work from home. It's like Fisher's thing, isn't it? Fisher's arguments about depression being a symptom of contemporary culture and work. I think like this is kind of perhaps a way, even if you can't get out the situation you're in, you can kind of start to question yourself in that situation rather than just getting swept along in the tide of it.
Yeah. See, right. I think despair, anxiety, abandonment, they're all going to be symptoms of this thing we've been thrown into.
Yeah. And I don't want to say necessarily younger, but I mean, for all people, I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, our experiences of us now, of where we are in life would be very different from, I remember life without the internet, without phones, and it was very different, you know, but I feel like someone like Sartre becomes more relevant the more humanness is pushed out in exchange for processes. We just see process all the time, don't we now?
And this brings to an end another episode of the Spinoza Triad, the philosophy podcast where we try to relate philosophical ideas which interest us to some of the things we find in the world around us today. This week, Dan Rowland, Dr. Richard Miller and myself, John Gibbs, discussed existentialism and the works of Jean-Paul Sartre. Particular reference was made to his essay Existentialism and as Humanism and Being and Nothingness. With thanks to Barry for the music and of course Richard, who also provided some of the music you heard on today's podcast. Also apologies to Dan, who, some of you may have noticed, seemed to go rather silent halfway through. Technical problems, I'm afraid, where his track simply didn't record. So sorry, Dan, we missed you in the second part and I stitched it back together. If you liked the podcast and you'd like to hear it again, you can find it on Spotify and many other platforms. Thank you for listening.